Hey everybody, and welcome to another Ruby Rogues podcast. I'm your host, Charles Max Wood, and this week on our panel we have, in no particular order, James Edward Gray. He is one of the organizers of the Red Dirt Ruby Conference. He wrote the TextMate book and the Faster CSV library, and does a whole bunch of other cool stuff for the community. Welcome, James.
Allegedly.
Allegedly. We have Peter Cooper, who is totally awesome.
Rock and roll.
He does Ruby Inside, Ruby Weekly, JavaScript Weekly. He's also one of the co-hosts for the Ruby Show and the JavaScript Show. And I think I forgot something, but I don't have my notes in front of me. Welcome, Peter.
Hey.
We also have Josh Susser. And I don't have my notes in front of me, so I don't remember anything. Why don't you introduce yourself for us, Josh?
That hurts. Josh, that's terrible.
Oh, man. I gotta go. Let's see, I'll just introduce myself as that guy who blogs at hasmany3.com, and I'm an organizer of the Golden Gate Ruby Conference.
Yes. All right.
So Josh, if for anyone that doesn't remember the history of Rails, Josh wrote the famous "How the hell does Hasmania belongs through work?" That was his famous post, as I recollect. That was, 2005?
Yeah, I think that's exactly what it was titled.
And he's been living off that success ever since.
Yeah. And then I don't know a whole lot about Dr. Nick other than he works at Engine Yard. He founded Mokra in Australia, and he's written a whole bunch of blog posts that I've read over the years.
Yeah, I'm a dabbler. I've dabbled.
He has about 1,000 gems. I
have 100-something open source projects, corresponding number of blog posts, and I just play and have a track record of doing things that turn out to be not that useful.
He's a bogan.
I believe the correct word for that is dilettante.
Josh, I like your terminology. I'm coming to you now for my personal marketing.
Feel free, I have very reasonable rates.
Excellent.
All right, and I'm Charles Max Wood, and I am the host of the Teach Me to Code podcast and screencasts, as well as the Rails Coach podcast, and of course we have this podcast. And I think that's it. We're going to be talking about corporate sponsorship, and I think that's within
I should introduce my bias at this point in time for the audience, since I don't think we introduced it before. So that, or do you have some longer introduction on this, or can I just
go for it?
No, go ahead.
So my job is as VP of Technology at Engine Yard, and we're the sponsors of and have been the sponsors of many open source projects. Currently, it's Rubinius, JRuby, Fog. In the past, it's been Rails 3, Bundler, and other things. So I know. However this conversation goes, understand I'm here to spruik. No.
I totally thought he was going to declare undying love to Heroku.
And that's kind of what we were talking about, off chat and on the mailing list that we were emailing back and forth. Basically, we were talking about Matt's joining Heroku. Nick, why didn't you guys think of that?
Yeah.
That's a good point.
So you can imagine that the conversation, the idea of Engine Yard, sponsoring lots of different projects, sponsoring Matt's, I'm sure, has come up around the water cooler. And we actually have a water cooler, so that's not that erroneous to suggest that, even though it is in a corner and very hard to have a water cooler conversation around. It is not the best water cooler, I'll be honest, for its purpose of being a social, gathering point. Nonetheless, obviously Engine Yard's thrown a lot of money at two alternate implementations.
Right.
And because, for various reasons. And ultimately, we think that JRuby is just a wonderful place for a whole group of people coming to Ruby. And now the state of JRuby is really, it's a pretty awesome place to run production, long running apps. Rubinius has just been a labor of love for certainly obviously the Rubinius people, but as part of Engine Yard's DNA, they've sponsored that for 4.5 years now. Mm-hmm. And I can imagine possibly at this stage, Matt's may not be a big fan of alternate implementations. I don't know if he's ever truly said so much, but something like Rubinius, I'm not sure whether where his thoughts are publicly, but perhaps coming to Engine Yard might have been a conflict of somehow
Just to clarify, my understanding is that Mats is very fond of the alternative implementations, and that he feels like it helps find problems in Ruby, and the teams do have a pretty good reputation for working with each other and stuff. So that I think mostly the environment has been pretty friendly.
I do understand, James, and I do agree. But for the sake of having somewhat of an interesting conversation here, I feel the need to at least take some pointed position so that this is not boring.
Right.
So Nick, can you tell us, like,
Has Mats ever used Rubinius?
I don't know. That's a good question.
I'm going to assume no. I'm going to say no. Certainly, he's not a committer.
It's not. He doesn't have a commit bit. That's
He doesn't
Not
have
his
a-
wall.
So that's inexcusable.
It is. It is. Maybe I should send him a Rubinius T-shirt or something.
Yeah.
I think he has his own distribution of Ruby to work on, though. I'm not sure about that.
He does kind of have some.
Everyone wants to do it themselves. That's the problem in this world.
Yeah.
Too many people forking. Too many forks.
Yeah, big NIH there, not invented here.
Exactly.
All right,
So,
so let's go ahead and jump in on the corporate sponsorship bit a little bit, because I'm a little curious. I think a lot of people see the benefits that a company might get from sponsoring a particular project, as well as the developer, obviously, being sponsored by a company to develop an open source project. But I'm not so clear always on what the pros and cons are for the community having a sponsored developer on a project. Thoughts on that?
So this is Josh, and I want to say that I don't think that I think Ruby is somewhat unique in the fact that it's one of the most popular languages around today, and yet up until this point, it hasn't really had a corporate sponsor.
Ruby itself, I don't believe has ever had. Obviously, AT&T sponsor it to some degree through Aaron Addison, but I think that's more the standard libraries itself.
There's absolutely a lot companies out there like AT&T and like Engine Yard.
That's right.
I love the work that Engine Yard has supported, or that Engine Yard has supported so much work around the Ruby ecosystem. But the core language itself, has not had a corporate sponsor up until now. And if you compare that to PHP had Yahoo, Google sponsors Python, Java of course came from Sun. All the big major languages out there that have significant adoption have gotten there partly because they had corporate support. And I think it says a lot about Ruby that it was able to become so popular without that kind of support.
Is it worth talking about? Does anyone have any opinions on why MRI has not attracted, corporate sponsorship?
That's his employed though, is he? Is he not?
Yeah. I mean, Matt's is retaining his two jobs, two other jobs, and his all grants. I assume, therefore, he's going to continue working on Write and other things. Right,
Yeah, it's an open source company in Japan.
There's some interesting culture issues there about rumors or suggestions that Japanese companies themselves aren't big into sponsoring open source. They like to use this stuff, but somehow they haven't as a group perhaps haven't gelled with the premise of sponsoring open source, which, given Ruby being based there, is perhaps affects it in some way. I was fascinated by why companies haven't been picking it up.
Well, I think that's an interesting question to discuss in general. I mean, it's hard to see sometimes what companies get. I mean, even AT&T Interactive, which pays Aaron to work on Rails full time, and Engine Yard is probably more obvious what you guys gain out of sponsoring JRuby and Rubinius, and that you're cultivating very robust production environments, which obviously helps you with some of your core goals. And so those are my assumptions of why you would do that.
Yep.
But
and the same when we sponsored Rails, which is personally before my time, but I'm going to say this like I was here the whole time. The reason you sponsor Rails is because that was kind of Engine Yard's thing. Rails was what all our customers were on, and we had to make sure that Rails was going to be the web platform of choice, so that people built Rails apps so they could become our customer. So sometimes you got to just invest in, even though the technologies themselves are free and open source, they're still core technologies that just happen as part of your platform that just happen to be out in the open.
But it is sometimes hard to see like the direct benefit. I mean, AT&T Interactive, I mean, they don't have, any kind of direct guarantee, I assume, that the things Aaron does in Rails directly help their Rails apps. You know what I mean?
No, I mean, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, the other guys at AT&Ti who Aaron has worked with or has worked for in the past, you would assume that at least it's in their plan to upgrade all their apps to the latest 3.1 and et cetera, et cetera. Though, I mean, that's obviously for their engineering teams to make that choice.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, that's true. But at the same time, if you're employing somebody like Aaron and he's committing regularly to Rails and understands the internals and things like that, then you also not only gain like features in Rails that you're going to want to use in the future, but you also gain an expert that's on your payroll that is somewhat beholden to you to help you out if you run into a problem. And there is that there as well.
That is correct. And another one is that you become a place. It's an employee attraction tool to some degree. Aaron's there. Well, I'd love to go and work at AT&T if Aaron's going to be around. And imagine how cool it would be to work with Aaron. Although the pictures he shows look a lot like his kitchen on Twitter. So I'm not sure whether working with Aaron means you get to put on funny hats and work from his kitchen. But I assume there's that aspect of it that goes along with it as and certainly this marketplace where the IT market or the tech marketplace seems to be somewhat independent of the recession we're all supposed to be having, and finding great staff is challenging. You look at companies like GitHub where they cultivate a facade to I'm not saying it's a false facade, but they cultivate their image as a place where you'd want to be a developer. People want to go and work at GitHub. And certainly that's another outcome of what we do. We want people to want to come and work at Engine Yard at all levels.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense as well. I think it's interesting too that as the companies give to these developers, they basically give them a salary to work on these open source projects, and they get these various benefits. I think there's also the payoff for the developer themselves, because most of these developers aren't just working on some project because other people are using it. They're working on a project because they're passionate about it, because they care about what it is, what it does, what it stands for. And it's interesting that they then get the opportunity to be able to do what they're passionate about all day long.
Absolutely. I mean, you look at take Yehuda Katz as an example. Very passionate about some of his visions for what a Ruby-based web stack should be like in terms of modularity. Back in the day, he and many other people weren't able to get those ideas into Rails. Hence, Merb became sort of the target, code base of choice to try and implement some of those ideas. Eventually, they were allowed to work directly against the Rails code base, and then they went on the 2-year, what became the 2-year project to the rewrite of Rails from the inside out. And I don't think that could have been as long as that project was, and some of the spin-off projects like Bundler, very complex, but wonderful outputs. I don't think they could have been done by people who were not as engaged as they were. Now, so they were hard refactoring problems.
That's a really good point. And Matz actually says that in his interview that basically the current development system of MRI was not sustainable. You had a bunch of people working on very complicated problems. I mean, they're trying to nail down things like, the complex mix-in system upgrades that they're trying to do. And there's been look at multiple virtual machines inside of one process and stuff like that.
Perhaps upgrade the garbage collector to something new.
Right.
Perhaps fix the C extension interfaces and things like that. And these are real hard. Constantly improving the virtual machine. These are real hard problems. And obviously you look at examples like the JVM has had comparatively multipliers more funding in terms of making those things perform, and so that it's been it's to some degree it's a disappointment. After 18 years, MRI as a code base has never had a major refactor. it's sort of just constantly being moved along, but not in a necessary software engineering sense.
Mm-hmm.
So I think from the good side, what we hope to gain out of this is that resources increase for the core team, and there's been mention that multiple members are now in negotiations with Heroku to join Mats's team, and that by having the more resources, that Ruby continues to evolve just faster and with more resources at their disposal. I think that's the upside we're all hoping for, right?
Yeah. I think we all are concerned, though, a little bit with, do these companies have an agenda with these different projects? Are they going to try and get their own kinds of things into Ruby? And the other thing that comes to mind when you bring
what's an example? I mean, I understand where you're coming from, and I'm wondering if you have like an example of something you think now Heroku is going to get put into MRI that the rest of us don't want anyway.
No, I can't think of anything.
So Charles, I think that's an interesting point to look at, and there's two sides to it. That the sponsor is definitely in a position to influence the technology, and you can worry about that and say, okay, maybe they're going to pursue their own agenda and in a way that doesn't actually serve the community at large. And having watched the Rails project develop over the years, every now and then you can see stuff that goes in there that 37 Signals cares about that maybe other people don't care about as much. I think the quintessential example of that is the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth, 10th methods on array. Where it was just like,
Josh, you reckon that's core business value for 37 Signals, you reckon?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's awesome.
So there's definitely an opportunity for a corporate sponsor to influence things in a way that doesn't necessarily make things awesome for everyone else, but as long as it doesn't detract, maybe that's not a bad thing. On the other hand, I think that having people who are hooked into real-world needs in a position where they can advance the technology and be supported in doing that is great. I mean, I think that having Yehuda and Carl working on Rails core stuff being supported by Engine Yard, seeing all of the stuff that all of Engine Yard's customers had to deal with and the way that they wrote code and the way that affected their performance. I think that was great that they were so tightly coupled there and they had that context to help.
Yep. And this is one of the things I'm really looking forward to from whether it's Heroku starting. I hope it's just the start. I think now that we know that these Japanese core guys are interested in being sponsored, and I say that because I kind of inferring that we were under the impression that was not something that was they wanted. As with me personally, I'm really excited that they mount. It's not so much. There's two parts. One, that they'll now start looking at caring about Ruby from the perspective of being a cloud language, which is obviously something Engine and Heroku both think is the state of the world. And the other aspect is perhaps the English-Japanese bridge might get blended more healthily, and perhaps the multi-language, the multi-Ruby universe just continue. Now there's more dedicated resources in MRI, perhaps they can manage the project and perhaps continue to look after Ruby spec as part of their core idea of who they are. The Ruby spec isn't just something that the rest of the Rubies use, but perhaps something that MRI will also embrace.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a good point. Heroku has stated that their hope is to see Ruby improve in cloud and areas. Obviously, that's valuable to them, and I'm sure that's what they're hoping to get out of it. But let's be honest, that's where most Rubyists make their money, off of cloud and web applications and things like that. So it seems like that if Ruby did improve in those areas, it would help the majority of Rubyists. So even though a company can exert an influence over, something, it's not necessarily that influence has to be bad, that probably helps us all.
So how do we think that some corporate sponsorship for Ruby is actually going to improve things? Like, what are the concrete ways that it's
there's the big quadrilla of projects, which is, Ruby, the Rubies themselves, Ruby Gems, RVM, and Bundler, which I think those there's four sort of projects that Bundler is sort of lacking. I think a maintenance schedule at the moment, or people to work on it. Obviously, RVM gets Wayne works on that. I don't. Engineer doesn't. We don't pay him to do that full time, but it's obviously core. We use it internally, so we look after it in that sense. Ruby Gems. We could spend as much time as we like discussing the excitement around Ruby Gems from a management of the projec's sense.
We had an episode on
we
that.
have. I'd hate to say that, here I am. I'd hate to miss out my opportunity. Seeing all those projects having an integrated, have them have resources so they can all move forward. Because I think they've all become sort of core to our workflow and production flow.
I kind of like that you implied not only that these projects would get dedicated resources, but you kind of inferred that they would also gain a little bit of structure in how they move forward. And I really kind of like that idea that, and I was kind of trolling a little bit with talking about the agendas on these different projects, but that they have the dedicated resources, and that these dedicated resources have the resources of a company behind them to move them forward, give them structure, give them the tools that they need to push it along. And
we have a lot of moving parts now when you look at those four, and perhaps if you want to add a fifth, you could say Gem Cutter as a service, which Nick Quaranto's been a wonderful job of, and perhaps Tom Copeland with Ruby Forge. So there's a whole bunch of moving parts to the organism that is the Ruby community. So seeing any sponsorship around, and so that those things can be healthy is a wonderful stuff.
Well, some of those things, Gem Cutter in particular, I think are supported by Ruby Central, and just because one company is now stepping up to sponsor things in a more official way doesn't mean that that has to all be centralized in one company. There's plenty of places where there are plenty of opportunities for multiple companies to support Ruby in different ways.
Yeah, and I wouldn't say that one company doing all the work is going to radically improve anything. I mean, the core people working on this stuff, people may or may not know, Evan Phoenix is the Rubinius lead, spends a lot of time working on Ruby Gems problems and working as part of that community around that project. I mean, they have working relationships, and just allowing them the freedom to actually solve these complex problems is I think a value that any company wants to help. I'd love more companies to be spending their capital or their revenue on helping make our community better. It'd be awesome.
Okay, I want to change tactics a little bit too and talk not so much about supporting particular projects by sponsoring the developers that are behind them, or in the case of Bundler, finding somebody else to kind of take it over since Yehuda and Carl are working on something else. But there are also projects that are kind of built by companies, I guess. So you have different gems and stuff that are provided by Thoughtbot.
And I think this is a really interesting one. And you look at perhaps Cloud Foundry from VMware, not to mention a competitor's product, kind of classless from a self-serving perspective. But it's one of those things that came out purely from a company. And I think that it's just from an open source perspective, it'd be interesting to see how they go as an open source project. Does it ever grow beyond the company that heavily funds it, or is it going to be perennially locked inside that company? Android perhaps fits into that model. So I don't know if that's where you're going to go with that conversation, but that would be interesting to know if anyone else had any thoughts of how company initiated projects can succeed or fail.
Well, there are a couple of examples that I can think of that, and that wasn't exactly where I was going to go, but I think it's an interesting thread to follow. There are other projects like Hadoop that was started at Google, but now is run by the Apache Group, as well as Cassandra and
Yahoo. It was started at Yahoo, I believe.
Yeah, Yahoo.
Which Hadoop?
Hadoop.
Yeah.
Was it Yahoo? Okay. Yeah. But there are these different projects.
Did you say Google?
I did.
There's an interesting story about why you might say that. Do you want to hear it?
Sure.
So as Josh said, it was started at Yahoo, but Google were the first to put it on a CD and ship it off to universities to teach people about that sort of model of thinking and problem solving, because they wanted people to be prepped about that so they could come and work at Google. So they took brand leadership on something they weren't even really working on. I think it's very clever.
That is clever. But anyway, these projects are now open source. They're not managed by the companies that started them, and they're meeting with some success. And so I think in some instances, depending on the use case for them, they can move beyond the companies that start them.
So we're now talking about like the 10-gen running Mongo, the Hortonworks, which is the company that has now been spun off from Yahoo to own and manage, well, owns the wrong word, but to do Hadoop work. Strobe running Sprout Core. Is that the sort of thing where they have there's a company directly tied to the product, and that type of thing, or?
Yeah, either way. I mean, let's talk about those for a minute, because it is interesting. It's not just they hired the guys that made Sprout Core, and so now they're paying them to work full time on Sprout Core, but they actually have a business model behind it.
Right. And parallel where 37 signals, Rails was not core, wasn't really their product. It was something that spun out from what they were doing.
Right.
And I think, those examples I gave, it's perhaps too soon to know whether those models work or not, but some of them were successful first, and then businesses formed around them, like Hadoop and Hortonworks. Sprout Core came out of Apple. Obviously had a very high impact example in terms of MobileMe. Has anyone ever thought of whether that's a good model or a bad model, or how decoupled? Like at Engineer, we try to decouple our notion of ownership of Rubinius and JRuby. We sponsor them, but really what we want them is to be massively successful. That's why we do it.
There's another interesting example or counterexample here, and that is that Oracle owned Hudson, and they owned the trademark on the name on Hudson, and so there was the whole naming snafu.
They owned that trademark about 30 minutes before they started exerting pressure on it.
Right. But
they found out they didn't own the trademark, went and got it, and then started being annoying.
Right. But they had this sense of ownership where they felt like they had the right to it.
Exactly. No, let's go with that. I mean, they used trademark as a way of trying to exert that, but they went down a different path, and see how that went for them.
Right.
Yeah. So I wonder if that cautionary tale, maybe we should look at a couple others. I've been wondering what's the downside of corporate sponsorship, and what are maybe things that the community has to watch out for or try and avoid. We've like now Oracle owns MySQL.
Yeah, and they own Oracle. That bodes well, doesn't it?
I agree, and I think we can give more examples. So we've already had Oracle and Hudson. I think Oracle has made some damaging moves with MySQL, changing the pricing structure. I mean, it's probably not dead yet, but I think they've definitely made some damaging moves and caused people to, reevaluate that project a bit. And then the one that keeps striking me. Google was so good about pushing Python until recently, and I think in recent years they've done a lot of damage to the Python community with kind of, I realized the moratorium was a community decision, but I think it was largely influenced by stability issues at Google, and then, in the meantime, Google basically replaces Python with Go, and I think they've done a lot of damage to that language recently.
I'm not familiar with that. Is there any more to that story? You sort of summarized it. Is Guido still there? Is it, it's still a first-class language of the app engine?
He is still there. It is still used at Google, although my understanding, and I'm pretty sure that they made public that internally they're phasing out the use of Python in favor of mainly Go.
Gotcha.
Lawyer up, dude.
Lawyer, right, right, yeah. I get lots of angry emails, but the issue is that it just didn't meet their needs when scaled it at their scale. But I feel like that
Python doesn't scale.
Python doesn't scale, right? Just
doesn't Google scale? That's and what's the point if you're not going to try and reach for Google scale?
Right. So I think that sponsors can be damaging, and that's why. We have an initial reaction of a little bit of concern when something like, happens like, we all want to believe Mats works for Heroku, but the truth is Mats works for Salesforce, pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
It's worked out awesome for Redis, though. I mean, I know Salvatore and VMware's sponsorship of Redis has been really good.
Yeah, and I like their model. Their model is the model we go with, which is throw a logo up there, just get your work done, make Redis awesome.
So there's a different kind of concern that I have about some of this, and that's that a community can become dependent on the support of the corporate sponsor. That I think Ruby's been in a great place up until now in some regards, because there aren't corporate masters calling the shots. And the support for Ruby comes from the community.
Yep, and the grassroots has been wonderful.
Right. So that's been great, and it's been hampering in some regards, but it's also been really engaging and empowering in other regards. But you can see that sometimes things happen that aren't awesome all around. And I'm not trying to knock Engine Yard here, but I remember a while back when Engine Yard downsized the Rubinius development team, and they went from.
So for anyone not listening, Rubinius started with Evan, then I think grew to 6 people, and then they decided to go back to 2 people. Yep.
Right, and I think that
there was a reason for that, but
yes, I'm not knocking how it was handled or that it was done. But I think that it is something to be aware of, that kind of thing can happen. And in the case of Rubinius has continued to enjoy strong support from the community, and the project has gone kick-ass and has just really continued to progress. So it worked out well in the end.
Yep.
And but there are potential cases where a company can basically make the community become dependent on it. So okay, great, they hired say Heroku / Salesforce hires the entire Ruby core team, and now all these people change their jobs and they go work.
All right, and then Benioff changes his mind and decides Ruby isn't the future of the cloud, and
then what happens?
That's right. Yep.
Yeah, but I do want to point out here that I just lost my train of thought. Sorry.
Well, I do think it works more often than not, and I really like Peter's example of Redis and other projects like that, where companies come in and add the support. I think that what you have is a bunch of guys working hard in Japan to make Ruby better, and that it comes down to they also have to have jobs and feed their families and stuff like that. So if Heroku can sponsor some of them and make that lessen some of those other needs, so they can move needs more toward Ruby, then pretty much everybody wins.
Yeah.
I mean, the corporate sponsor isn't the only one to be concerned around. I mean, the people being sponsored suffer from the same burnout issues or wayward focus that anyone can suffer from, and certainly some projects. I mean, you got Carl and Yehuda that had about enough of working on Rails full time at the time that they finally got it over. They committed to getting it over the line. They did that, then they decided to go off and devote themselves to something else. I mean, there's also the human aspect of working full time on something. Can become similar to having a real job.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what I was going to say before was just that it seems like, in all of the counterexamples that we gave, it seemed like the corporate sponsor kind of overstepped things and decided that whatever it was that they were sponsoring was no longer owned in a certain sense by the community, and that they had the right to enforce certain restrictions on it. And it seems like in a lot of those cases, that's when the problems begin to occur, is because the community is moving one way and the company that's sponsoring it is trying to move in a different direction with it, whether that be monetization or or meddling in it in some way. And so
classic community meddling.
SQLite avoids that though very well by having several corporate sponsors, so they're all kind of like equal.
Another interesting protection from SQLite is that they force all contributed code into the public domain. That's part of contributing to SQLite. So basically, it guarantees going forward that no matter what happens at the corporate sponsor level, SQLite in its current form at that point, you can always take it and run with it. So that's interesting protection built into their model.
Well, I've got another type of corporate sponsorship for you, and that's the fork.
The fork, right?
companies like Fusion, who did Ruby Enterprise Edition, Twitter, who then took that and did their own fork of that, and those contributions either not being offered up mainline or being rebranded, or perhaps going against the core maintainers' desires and therefore not being accepted. But,
I gotta say, I like those less. But for example, in Ruby Enterprise Edition, they forked because they wanted to improve performance under the hosting of web applications. So they basically went all the way through MRI and made some massive patches that made massive changes. And they did make a single attempt, I think, or maybe a few, to throw those back to the Ruby core team, and they said, well, yeah, you did prove performance on web applications, but you also hurt performance under these cases, and these cases. And those guys weren't interested in working around that and resolving those, which I think is unfortunate, because then all that work could have gone into MRI and we all could have benefited from it forever.
So do we put this under corporate sponsorship misguidance, or is it just human beings not communicating?
It's a good question. I don't know. So you gave Ruby Enterprise Edition. What was the other example of fork you gave?
Just to take that story further, was Twitter recently announced they'd been working on REE.
Right. See, that seems, again, where, okay, so all that's happening in a black box and none of that's getting back to Ruby,
Right.
And that seems bad both for the Ruby community and for Twitter itself, because if Twitter continues to just, fiddle with their own version, then eventually they'll be running Twitter Ruby instead of Ruby, and they won't be able to take in things from the main line that may potentially help them.
And if you watch sort of Twitter's architectural evolution as a company as they move toward, Evan Weaver did an interview with InfoQ recently, and sort of said out loud what we'd all sort of been watching as their gradual move away from Ruby, which is sort of their birth language, to Java-based languages and typed languages. You can kind of imagine that, therefore, there's going to come a point where they're going to cease support for some of the open source they've done, but if they never get up mainlined back into a community-sponsored project, then it's kind of the death of that branch.
Right. But now I can think of forks that were probably good cases, like what about Jenkins, since we talked about Hudson earlier, right? Yep. So that
was a brand. Yes. To me, that was always just a rebranding and a liberation of the suffering. But it's a fascinating story, and no doubt someone will write a book, and Hudson Jenkins will be an interesting. And I'm not sure where they're up to now with the reunification. I know they started that, but hopefully Oracle give up and we can all go back to being happy together.
Yeah, my understanding is that there was some concession made to where they were going to rename it back to Hudson, but I don't know more than that.
No, I haven't seen anything definitive.
That's another good point, where keeping it open, keeps your options open, which, is good news. In Ruby community, we have that too. If Heroku goes crazy tomorrow and makes Heroku Ruby and starts trying to close all the open doors, then we can fork Ruby at that point and go forward,
Yeah, well, and the other thing is I think we can all count on Matt's or, whoever else is there working on it, that if that kind of stuff starts happening, that, that they'll move things out where we can get to them. Because I think the agenda with Ruby, if the agenda with Ruby and the agenda with Heroku don't line up, then, I can see Matt's, feeling some obligation to the community to do what's best for Ruby.
And he was pretty clear about that in the interview that he did. That we should put a link to that in the show notes, by the way, the interview that got translated a couple days ago, talking about this. I assume everyone on this call has read it.
Right.
Maybe not. So I want to throw in a sort of blue sky or wish list moment here, and that I think that there's been some things about Ruby that people have criticized, in many cases rightly, about things like documentation and support for like system library support, or when people start comparing Ruby to other languages, they'll say, oh, Python's so much better at math or scientific processing or system library support, and it has better documentation. I'm wondering if this is an opportunity for Ruby to try and level up in some of those areas where the language has not measured up to other languages.
So you're asking us what we think they should do with their new resources to be awesome Ruby or better Ruby?
Yeah, I mean, if someone's in a position to throw money at the problem, what's the problems we want them to be solving?
Is that how it works though? You start with money and problems come out and solutions come out, or do you sort of find someone who is passionate about a problem space and money follows him?
It's a good question, but I will say that so when I was in Japan attending Ruby Kaigi, Mats had just done one of his famous large, undocumented, untested commits. And the way those usually work is he throws a bunch of code at Ruby and then they kind of reverse engineer it to figure out what it does so we can get some basic documentation and testing going, And I remember Yugi giving him crap on stage and threatening to take away his commit rights, because he can't follow the rules like anybody else. So perhaps
I've heard similar things said about perhaps the owner of Rails as well, just wandering in and throwing in some less than production quality contributions.
So perhaps Heroku putting a bit of pressure on there for some documentation or proper process.
We have to get back to, do you think Heroku is going to do that? Do you think that, code quality is at the top of there? God damn it, can we have, we're paying for code quality? Or is it just we just want him to pay more attention to Ruby and less attention to whatever else he's paying attention to?
Well, even that.
Anime.
Anime.
Yeah.
Even that's maybe an interesting question, though. Mats and the core team have admitted several times that they don't really use Ruby for web applications, even though the rest of the world does, so that even if Heroku just says, can we focus on some VM features that would help web apps? Maybe that's
that doesn't surprise me. That doesn't surprise me at all. I think if you go a lot of the language implementers, they'll claim to not necessarily be massive users of their thing because obviously, the JRuby guys are Java developers. The C Ruby guys are C developers. Ruby Kaigi is a big C conference and that sort of thing. So I think that's a natural tension that's going to exist. Their fascination is making a wonderful Ruby implementation, not necessarily owning the whole experience all the way up to does HTML get rendered quickly.
That's probably true, but I bet also in the past, I know we've had sweeping Ruby releases that just destroyed Rails horribly, the
1.9 branch, 7 years in the making before it was production ready. I mean, that's not a high point of software engineering execution.
Right. But I do think that nowadays they do try to be better about making sure they haven't broken Rails horribly before they release.
Yeah, and I believe the whoever's in charge of actually the product release of Ruby committed for the 1.9.2 release. They committed that that it would have to pass the Ruby spec. And I think that was for 1.9.2 patch 0 was the first time they ever made that commitment.
Right, and that's Yugi, just to be clear. She's in charge of the 1.9 releases.
Yep. Thanks, Yugi.
I wonder if some of the biases that the Ruby core team has are going to come into tension with the biases of the sort of largely American and European Rails developer community. The Ruby core developers, I think they mostly develop on Windows systems. They like Shift.js instead of UTF-8. There's a couple interesting little biases in there that have caused little kerfuffles here and there, to use my favorite NPR word.
The word kerfuffle is not used by far enough, Josh. And
Imbroglio.
I appreciate you bringing it into context here.
Yeah.
Put that word in the show notes for anyone wanting to look it up and get the correct spelling.
It's kerfuffle with a K.
Yeah.
but no. I mean, back to my point. I just wonder how much of those tensions are going to become an issue. I know that there was some either performance or stability patch that Tenderlove, Aaron, submitted and was rejected by Ruby core because it wasn't compatible with what a lot of the American community feels is an obscure Windows development case.
Mm-hmm.
And that alone, I mean, Rubinius had yet to, really solve any of the Windows issues late last year, and it's been one of their parallel projects. JRuby is kind of gets the benefit of the Java's commitment to the Windows platform. But I mean, platform agnosticism or making sure your stuff works across all of them and caring can be a torturous aspect. Node.js is, making a commitment to that now, but we haven't even talked about them enjoying it yet, which is an interesting corporate sponsorship. That to me isn't a corporate sponsorship thing. Just to tie this all into the theme of the talk, that's just people with their biases. I don't know if Matt's being paid by an American company, or sponsored, or however you want to refer to this relationship they have, is going to change his biases.
Right.
I don't know if that comes with the contract.
Who knows?
McDonald's.
All right. Well,
McDonald's food.
Well, I'm gonna go ahead and drive us into the picks here, and then we can pick this up and post it as an extra on the website. But for those who are new, and Dr. Nick, this is your first time, so we'll explain this to you as well. But the picks are just things that are interesting or that have helped us out or have different tools. They can be programming tools. They can be television shows. They can be toys, whatever. But just things that you think are cool that you want to share with the audience and with the other panelists. And we just take a few minutes and explain what our picks are and why we like them. So I'm gonna go ahead and start this one off because I always make somebody else start. And my picks this time, I have one tech pick and one non-tech pick. And the tech pick is Cassandra. I've been playing with it, and it's really cool. It scales up really nicely. It, the paradigm's a little bit different as far as the database structure, but it's really, really awesome. And I'm actually going to be talking about it at Rocky Mountain Ruby in about a month and a half. And so, anyway, I'm kind of excited about it just because in playing with it, I've seen it do some pretty cool stuff. And that's another open source project. It was started at Facebook. Twitter uses it. A bunch of other companies use it, and it is now supported by the Apache group. It's an Apache project. The other one that I'm going to pick, I've been watching Stargate SG-1, and I've really been enjoying it. And so I'm about most of the way through the second season, and it's really been cool. I've been watching it on Netflix and just really been enjoying it. So, both geek picks, one tech pick, and there you go. Let's go ahead and let Peter go next.
I'm going to do an anti-pick to start with, and that's TK. The TK library, it seems that we talked about this, about Ruby and the different uses in Japan. Seems that often the Ruby releases get delayed because of TK for some reason. I saw that this week, about 193 was delayed because of this. The 192, the new patch level, was delayed because of TK problems. So anti-pick TK. More positively, we've been talking about mats, and this book is so worn that I just have to recommend it because I've come across so many Rubyists who don't know what I'm talking about when I mention this book. And it's the Ruby Programming Language from O'Reilly by David Flanagan and Mats. And it's just an awesome book. It's basically as close as you can get almost to a reference for the language straight from the mouth of Mats, or at least with his stamp of approval.
Have you ever thought about the irony of needing a reference guide to a language which proposes that it should be self-discoverable or do whatever you think it should do?
No.
That's awesome.
No, not at all. But yeah, I always learn something every time I pick it up, have a flick through. There's always something cool I pick out or remember. I'm going to quickly go through two others.
You pick through it with a pickaxe?
Oh, nice.
Well, you could try. Yeah, if you don't want if you want to skip all the tutorial stuff and just go straight to the reference, this is the good stuff. Code Brawl, codebrawl.com. It's run by Jeff Kreeftmeyer. I'm not very good at pronouncing his name. It's a cool thing, because I know that James used to run the Ruby quiz. This is a little bit simpler. It's basically try and make a cool testing library, and bam, you get a week to do it, and then you vote, and that's kind of cool. So codebrawl.com. And last but not least, Michael Edgar's Ruby Patches. repository on GitHub, he explains very simply how to install different patches which he's accumulated inside this repository to do things like add in little extra features that people have patched into MRI and JRuby, I believe. And it's very, very simple with RVM, just a one-liner to install any one of the patches, and off you go. You can be playing with various new features and things that people have cobbled together. So I'll send over the links and share them all with you.
So if you apply those Ruby patches, is that Ruby Reloaded?
Oh,
Ouch.
nice.
You want to tell us what Ruby Reloaded is real quick?
I can, although it's all sold out. But Ruby Reloaded is a course that I'm running actually next week at rubyreloaded.com. It's an online thing. It's like a 2-day, 8 hours spent on with a month's forum kind of mentorship for intermediate Ruby developers. So
So
I
if
do have
you've
a
enjoyed the dulcet tones of Peter Cooper, you can have more of that in an
That's it,
8-hour
but-
block.
But yeah, you're not going to enjoy my dulcet tones for at least the next few weeks, though, because I am very busy with all of these different things. So I'm semi-retiring from the show for a while. So
What?
Yeah, he's leaving us to go make some money.
We're sad. We're going to miss Peter. But on the upside, Josh has agreed to join us. So he's been a semi-regular, and he's sticking around. So
Yeah, speaking
Yes,
of
Do you do a
Josh, go
poll?
ahead.
How do you figure out which, does certain guests rate more highly? Is that how you pick Josh, or is he just like available?
yeah,
A little of
we,
both.
I rate highly because I'm available. I rate highly because I'm available.
That's right. But actually, we have had a lot of feedback that Josh is a good addition to the Rogues.
From the targeted advertising demographic.
Right, exactly.
Gotcha.
It works out. Although I may have to miss next week because I'm on call for jury duty.
Oh man.
Yikes. Just say he's guilty and get out of there.
Right.
Yeah, look at the police officer. You did your job, right? Yep. Guilty.
Nice. Okay, great. So is this my pick turn?
Yes, I
Yeah.
think so.
Okay. So I got a follow-up from last week where I was talking about the RESTful Web Services book, which and Steve Klabnik tweeted at me after the podcast saying, "Oh, you got to check out Hateos, or however you pronounce it. It's spelled HATEOAS, and it stands for Hypermedia as the Engine of Application State." And this is part of Fielding's dissertation, and it gets a mention in the Ruby or the RESTful Web Services book that I picked last week, but there's not too much about it in the book, and that's why I missed it when I was reading through it. But Steve Klabnik has a nice write-up on that, and so I'll put a link to that in the show notes for you. And that mentions it has a couple other mentions in his blog post, and it doesn't take much Googling to find some other references. So that is a nice start to learn about hypermedia as the engine of application state and how to deal with the connectedness and versioning of APIs and all of that. I still think that there's not enough information available here, and that there's not good examples on it. And there's actually, I think, a good opportunity to try and level up the support for this in Rails as well. So it's been is a good little.
Is there a plugin? So I'm still reading through this. Is there like and most nice things like this start as plugin, and then DHH decides he likes them, which is how REST came in. But where's this? Is this just an article or what?
This is just an article, and it's just information. And I think that there are next steps to take. But I think that because this is so coupled to hypermedia formats, hypertext formats, that the plugins aren't going to be able to appear until you actually have some idea of what are the media formats that you need to use.
Josh, that's a barrier to entry. Having to know something before you use it, that's going to... So you could use REST. When everyone found out, you mean we're doing REST already? Whee! That was, there's, all of a sudden you just made tens of thousands of Rails people cool. You just had to let them know they were cool. But if you could just drop it in and go, there's generators, our generators just generated the right thing, and we could live and learn the patterns. I mean, how do I get, what's the pattern here that can be generated or sort of automatically taught along the way? Do I need to generate these entry link things?
I haven't quite figured out how much of this stuff is idiosyncratic and how much of it is generic.
All right.
So I'm still reading up on all this.
See the
stuff.
show notes.
Yeah.
Yes, see the show notes.
And-
And then I have another pick, which is super geeky but non-technical, and that's the BlendTech blender that I got recently. So if you
That's
Google
awesome.
if you Google for "will it blend," you can find videos of them blending pretty
I
much.
love those videos.
They are
Does it come
so
with any
funny.
sample things to blend, like first generation iPhones and whatever?
iPhones, yeah.
Yeah.
yeah. iPods, iPhones, shoes.
Diamonds, I think they did. Glass. There are
yeah,
a whole bunch of them.
But aside from all the novelty value of being able to blend your iPhone, although I tried and my iPad wouldn't fit in the blender, so
I don't know whether to laugh or cry.
you know.
Yeah, the industrial strength.
But I guess I gotta say this is the most amazing blender ever, and I do a lot of smoothies for breakfast
It's
now.
such a late night television concept, though. If it wasn't for YouTube, you'd be watching ads for that at 3 a.m. going, I do need to blend my, freaking 16 shirts.
Awesome.
So I like to eat healthy. I think smoothies are a great way for me to do breakfast because they don't require a lot of prep. But with this blender, it's great. I just throw everything in there. I can throw in whole raw nuts. I can throw in flax seeds, chunks of ginger, whole carrots. It's just and it just blends it all up into a delicious smoothie. So it's not like
5 1/4 inch floppy disks that you don't need anymore.
Absolutely, I can get more gigabytes in the.
There was actually a blog post during the week of someone declaring that you could, if you had them, toss out your 5 1/4 inch discs. Now is the time.
I'm glad we have permission for that.
I think he's still got the 3.5 disc on deprecated warning, but he said 5 1/4 you can toss them out.
What about the 8-inch floppies?
Yeah, I've never seen one.
You don't have permission on those yet.
No,
Yeah.
you can find one that's probably worth something. They've gone back into a different phase.
So anyway, and then the super dangerous thing about the BlendTech is that it has a milkshake button.
Oh no.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and it has all these pre-programmed buttons that control the speed and power and duration of the engine. And there's literally a milkshake button.
Is there an iPhone button?
No, there's not. They got to work on that. Okay, so that's it for my picks.
All right. I want to clarify one thing, and that is that if you don't know who Steve Klabnik is, he is the guy behind Hackety Hack, I believe. Isn't he the maintainer of Hackety
That's right.
Hack?
Yes.
So-
And he's on Changelog.
Yeah.
Yes. So
Oh, sorry, competitive product. My mistake. La 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 la. Never said that.
and anyway, so if you want to learn to program, Hackety Hack is a good way to go. James, go ahead and share your picks.
Okay, I can't remember if I've recommended iTerm 2 or not, so if I haven't, I'm recommending it, and if I have, I'm recommending it again. It's reached 1.0 now, so it's gotten pretty stable, and I was one of those people that just used Apple's terminal forever, and then once you switch over to iTerm 2, you realize that was really stupid, because iTerm 2 is just amazing. Just having like a keyboard shortcut to full screen the terminal. It does all of your.
Click on the directory links and it'll actually open up stuff.
Yeah, you can divide it horizontally, vertically. You can build it where it pops down as a visor and whatever app you're in when you hit a
You
certain
can remap colors.
Remap colors, yes. Seriously, there's Apple's terminal, which is like a Fisher Price terminal, and then there's iTerm 2, which is like
This is the Meccano of the Lego family. You're saying
that's right. It's amazing. So if you are not yet using iTerm 2, now is the time. It's ready and it's amazing. So
got your name all over it. Yep.
So I can install it on my Mac Pro and then pull it out of the handicap spot.
that's right, exactly.
James, how is it doing in terms of stability and performance now?
I've had no problems, none. So, and I use it all day, every day. So I'm very happy.
All right.
It was quite buggy at the beginning of the move to the 2 phase, but they've been just squashing the heck out of bugs since then. So, and in my opinion, it's very stable now. But definitely check it out and see what you think. But it's a serious terminal, so you definitely want to try it. My other pick is totally technical. I've got that new router, as I mentioned last time, I think, and so I've basically just been looking for ways to abuse all the content coming into my house. And Netflix will stream HD, so you can stream down. Oh, and they just stuck all the Star Treks on Netflix, except for DS9, which is coming in October. But all the others are on there, and the original series and Enterprise have been remastered to HD. So you can go in there and you can just stream down episodes in HD, and they're really
I'm not
good.
sure. What's the demographic of our audience? Because perhaps Star Trek's too advanced, and perhaps the demographic, they might like to know that all of the Power Rangers episodes are available too. So depending on who you are as a listener, you might.
However, what made me extremely sad is that the Star Trek animated series is not available on Netflix.
Ooh, that is a hurt. But my wife and I just went back and rewatched every single episode of The Next Generation, and that was
Really?
Yeah,
Jesus Christ!
that was campy fun, So. Anyways, you should do it. It's fun.
Are the
good.
movies on yet, or is it just the TV series?
It's the TV series, and now we're watching the movies.
I know the most recent movie is on there. We just watched that, but I hadn't seen the other movies.
Which one is the most recent one? I don't recall.
The one with all the lens flares.
And Nemesis,
The one
I believe Nemesis is the last one.
Okay.
No, Enterprise with Chris Pine and Zach Quinto.
Oh, right.
Yeah, the J.J. Abrams, the first ever making
oh.
of a show which actually did a time travel back into the start of the last one.
Right, I was only talking about Next Generation movies. You're right. The other one is Star Trek, the reboot, which, in my opinion, is one of the best reboots of a series ever. So
Yeah.
No, I've enjoyed watching it a number of times.
I was trying to figure out how they were going to keep everything consistent, and then at the end, it's like, yeah, this is a new timeline. It was like, oh, cool.
yeah, that was really cool because they got to throw out all the parts that sucked and keep everything they wanted.
Now,
Yeah.
it might be hard for people to remember, but I certainly remember when I watched it the first time. It was on at the same time as Heroes, and I was expecting Spock at any moment just to wave his hand around, and shit would start flying around like Sylar from Heroes.
Yeah, someone would slam against the wall, and their head would start to cut open.
cut somebody's head right off. Yeah.
Yeah. So the best thing about this movie is it lasted. Its rewatchability is longer than Heroes, so I can now watch that movie without really remembering Heroes and Sylar.
That's right.
The cool thing about that movie is that it reset things so that the Enterprise series is now the only one that's canon.
That's
Yes.
right. That's a good point.
Yeah.
Yeah, that one didn't run very long, though, did it?
No.
4 seasons. Enterprise ran 4 seasons.
Longer than the original series.
Nice.
Somebody had to point that out. All right, Dr. Nick, what are your picks?
All right, I'm going to pick something that I think is new and shiny to me, though it's going to show perhaps date me in some direction. But I'm actually a big fan of Postgres, and anyone that's a big lover of Postgres is going to think I'm an absolute tool. But I think what it means is that I've actually chosen a SQL implementation rather than just taking some arbitrary default that you might have. And I have to be honest, I think it's interesting to know why I went with Postgres, because as much as I know all of its wonderful performance production characteristics, it was actually because I watched the PEEP code on Postgres, and it showed transactional migrations in Rails, and that was an absolute pain point for me. My half a decade of Rails development was migrations that break halfway through and just having to redo them. So I moved to Postgres. Now I use it in production for everything, and so yeah, that's a big win. And I mean, if I could
so Nick, is this just entirely coincidental with the fact that EngineYard is rolling out support for Postgres on App Cloud?
I was actually being a lot more gratuitous than that. I was going to say that was the case, but no, I love Postgres. This is my. I mean, what's worth mentioning is for anyone that didn't watch Aaron Patterson's RailsConf talk, which is on YouTube, but he talks about the big performance boost for everything except MySQL coming up in Rails 3.1. So get off MySQL and go to either SQLite or Postgres or SQL Server, but yeah, some big performance boosts coming. I'm all about it for the transactional migrations.
I'm going to have to change my arbitrary default then.
You're arbitrary, that's right. Perhaps nerdy. I don't know if it's nerdy, but something my wife and I watch on the old Netflix is In Plain Sight. So it's actually In Plain Sight. It's a wonderful showcase of the delightful city of Albuquerque, but it's all about
Albuquerque?
Albuquerque, I know. It's a hotbed. Certainly, it's now on our must-see list of cities in America since we moved here. It's a show about what's the show about? It's about
Isn't that where they exile all the witness protection folks?
the witness protection, WITSEC, yeah. But the two main characters are kind of fun to watch. Their banter and the premise of WITSEC, I think, allows for a lot of interesting sort of stories. And my
You
wife
saw
said-
something horrible. We're going to send you to nowhere.
Yeah, that's right. You and New Mexico are best friends. I have a nerdy thing, again, just a low-level nerdy thing. I love the ---- RVMRC flag on RVM. The ability to sort of generate a .rvm file, RVMRC file within a project and sort of fix it on a version of Ruby that it needs, so that whenever you go into that folder, it automatically changes which Ruby you're using. Certainly useful here at Engineered, where we have lots of some aging projects that have different levels of support for different Rubies, and it means you can sort of go in and not have to remember what Ruby to use. And I have one final phase, more of a world. For anyone, this is not just nerd. This is I think any listener was going to appreciate. Novelty thing I think anyone should at least try once is living in America. We're trying it. It's novel and it's working out all right for us. So if you're never done it before, give it a try.
But he's new here, so pretty soon it could be leaving America. You never know.
I'll let you know about that one too.
I need to practice my living in America.
Nick, could you also look at that as leaving Australia?
No, that's I can't recommend that.
I recommend winning the Ashes.
Ouch. Ouch.
So many people on this call not listening and not caring, but nonetheless, very funny.
All right. Well, I think that's everything. So I'm going to cue the music and wrap this up. I just want to thank our panelists again for coming. And again, in no particular order, we have Josh Susser.
Great to be back.
Dr. Nick, thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me on this prestigious, medical drama.
James Edward Gray.
Thanks, Dr. Nick.
And Peter Cooper.
I'll see you all in the future sometime.
And I'm Charles Max Wood, and I love these discussions, and it sounded like some people had some more to say, so if there's enough extra, then we'll record that too. We'll put it up as an extra. I'm going to probably...
what I'd love, if anyone listens to this, there was a lot of occasions where someone would say something and then someone else would say, that's a good question, without ever, really getting to the answer of those. If anyone has answers to any of our interesting questions, feel free to put them somewhere.
Oh yeah, we're a lot more about the questions than
Right.
than the answers.
We love to open loops. We're not loop closers here on the show.
Yeah,
right.
but if you do have input on those, by all means, go to rubyrogues.com and leave a comment. And, hopefully we can get a little bit of a discussion going there to see what people think about that stuff. You can also get the show notes there, and there are subscribe buttons on the website as well, so you can get all of that. We have all of the panelists listed on the right, so you can click on their name and see who's been on which show. And we're also in iTunes, so if you go into iTunes, while you're there, leave us a review. Let us know what you think. Really, really appreciate that. It not only helps the show, but it helps us know what's going on. And finally, if you have a topic that you'd like to hear about on the show, if you go to the website and click on Request a Topic, you can suggest a topic. You can vote up other topics that you think would be good to hear about. And we're going to try and cover some of those as we move along. So, we throw in stuff like this that, nobody really suggested, but, we're trying to do both. So if you have a suggestion and we really like it, then we'll run with it. So that's about all I have. We will catch you next week. And next week we are going to be talking about one of the topics off of the website. We're going to be talking about the when, where, and how, and why of metaprogramming. So if that's a topic that you're interested in, then...
Don't do it. It was fun in 2006. No one does it anymore. It's uncool.
So
And that's why Dr. Nick was not invited for that episode.
That's right. And this is coming from the author of Dr. Nick's Magic Models, which is just a cluster of MetaMap programming.
Yeah. So, if you want to hear about Uncool, come back next week. Thanks.